I'd like to welcome you on this journey of exploring what a difference it might make if we're aware of emergent creativity and adjacent possibles whenever we want to do something to make our community better or create something, a new enterprise, or do something that's going to make a positive difference in the lives of people around us. I've been really impressed in recent years with the creativity that I've seen among young people. I was at a European Center for Peace and Development conference in the Western Balkans a few years ago, and I was just astounded at the creative spirit, all the different initiatives and the things that were being done. Likewise, recently I heard a diplomat from Afghanistan talking about how what's hidden to the rest of the world, but what is operative within Afghanistan is that the young people are filled with creativity and hope, and they're doing some very amazing things. So young people have this way of using social media. It's like they're born with it and becomes a tool that they can use so effectively, and they're creating new enterprises and doing new things, and I'd like to be part of that whole movement and initiative that I really believe in. So what we want to do in terms of enhancing our creativity is to look at the conditions for emergent creativity and what it might mean to build on adjacent possibles and combine theory and examples in all of this. So Stuart Kauffman, who's a cell biologist and evolutionary biologist, has done a lot of work on what are the conditions under which new things are created or new things emerge, emergent creativity. And he says this is a function of how we make connections between different elements in the environment and the diversity of resources. And the line of criticality looks something like this. So along the line of criticality, the chances are really good that something new is going to happen. So it can either be in a situation where we've got lots of ways of making connections, but very few different resources, or it could be when we have few ways of making connection, but lots of resources. So think about Lego. Lego pieces, as they were originally, you had very few different kinds of Lego pieces. But the ways of combining them were almost infinite. So you could create all sorts of things out of these simple Lego pieces. So that's an example of few resources, but many ways of making connections. Or if you think about, if you have an apartment and you want to furnish it and make it into something interesting, you want to create a new living space, you don't have that many rooms and you don't have that much space, so you don't have that many ways of making connections because there are few pieces that you're going to put in each room, but you go to an apartment store or a furniture store and there are many different resources, so you can be really creative with this great diversity of resources. If you have very few of either of these things, you're in a static situation. Nothing's going to change. If you have too many, you're in a chaotic situation where there's just too much happening and it's not likely that anything creative is going to happen. So you want to manage your situation and ask yourself in any particular case, what does it take to move toward that line of criticality? And so what we're looking for is the emergence of something new, and very often this can't be predicted. You just put the conditions together and it's likely then that something will happen. So you consider criticality for this to come about and try to avoid the static and chaotic situation, and then whatever new happens will open up these adjacent possibles. So let me give you an example. Kofi Annan, who used to be Secretary General of the United Nations, would be in a room with 100 people from 100 countries, lots of views, lots of possible combinations of how ideas could be put together, but it was too much, and people just couldn't move forward. And so what he did is he would choose 10 people that were kind of representative of different perspectives, bring them into his office, and together they'd come up with something that was new, creative, and in this more manageable situation where he reduced the number of connections and the resources by having fewer people, they could do this creative work, and then when they brought it to the whole group, it was something that everybody could agree upon. So when you think about personal computers, when everybody had started to have a computer and it was widespread, the adjacent possible was the internet, and I get this example from Stuart Kauffman himself. And as soon as the internet was there, the new adjacent possible was social media, Facebook and LinkedIn and so on. And then as soon as you had social media, the adjacent possible is that you could use this to mobilize people for protest events. Once you had this capacity, then the adjacent possible was to have greater political accountability, because leaders had to take note of what was going on in these big protests. And then the new adjacent possible, when there's political accountability, is you can have new forms of economic growth, new freedoms, and so on. So I want to talk a little bit about this vest as a concrete example of emergent creativity. So it started out when our family traveled to Washington, D.C., and we didn't have much disposable income at that particular time. And in a market, I saw a Guatemalan vest that was kind of a patchwork of things. And I said, I'd like that, but we couldn't afford to buy it. So this was a new opportunity then for Gloria, who said, oh, I'll make you a vest like that. This was the coming out of this desire was this new potential for her to do that. So she went to the fabric store and told the person there what she wanted to do, and it was a little bit like a patchwork quilt. And this other person brought her resources as an artist to say, these different pieces of cloth could go together. And we would have never suspected that. If Gloria and I would have been shopping together, we wouldn't have brought these together. But she said, look, if you take this piece with flowers and this piece with flowers and this piece with flowers, normally we would have said, well, you know, you shouldn't really combine different flowered things together. But she suggested it, and it kind of worked. And you put some pieces of plain material in, and lo and behold, I got the vest. We put it all together. Now, with the construction of a vest, the adjacent possible is that you could make it reversible, and you could have a design on the other side. And we had this fabric that's a Navajo kind of style fabric, and I love indigenous people. And we said, well, why don't we make that the basis of the back? But then what do you do on the front? If you have that, well, you get some matching material as a basis for it and embroider some flowers. So all that is to say that out of this desire came this new opportunity, and combining the artistry of the person in the fabric store, we could come up with a vest, and that made possible this doing it reversible, and that made possible my being able to use this vest as an illustration. So if you think about it from that perspective, you can ask yourself, what do you really want for your community? This vest started with my having a desire, which was a vision. You know, I could see myself wearing a multicolored vest. And then you ask yourself, well, what really is needed if we want this for our community? And who has the skills and knowledge that could help? So a lot of countries that are affected by conflict have people in the diaspora around the world. And they have a whole lot of knowledge, for instance, that they would be happy to contribute to their own community. Then you could ask yourself, where and when could we have a facilitated dialogue to move this ahead? So a facilitated dialogue might include brainstorming to say, okay, suppose we need these and these resources. How could we get them? And everybody contributes their ideas, and they build on each other's ideas, and you come up with a plan. And then if you say, well, if we want a community dialogue, who could get it organized? And you put your heads together, and lo and behold, you can do things. So I've come up with a whole handbook on community dialogues related to social reconciliation and economic development. It includes issues of governance and spirituality. If anybody wants it, I'm happy to share it. But it can be like a menu, a checklist of things that you can do for your community. And it's not prescriptive. It doesn't say you have to do this first. It's just like, here's a resource that people could use if they wanted to do something new in their community. So if you need to contact me, you can always find me on the internet and send me an email, and I'd be happy to share this handbook with you, and we could take it from there. And it's always a joy to be in partnership with people who want to do something with their community, especially if they're open to the emergence of new things and are willing to build on those new things with adjacent possibles.